So, hello. Yeah, I'm Kapil Verma. I'm a freelancer, entrepreneur, developer based in New Delhi, India. My ISC nick is K_89, and you can usually find me on #Laravel off topic. And my GitHub, Twitter, and Google Plus handle is Kapu89. I'm primarily involved with MuseJam, which is a platform for live music industry. And these guys are really trying to cater to all of the industry, not just the artists and the end users, but also like event organizers, venues, recording studios, and all the company, basically the whole industry. And its version 1 is out in public beta. It's entry by invite, and I'm working on version 2 with a few other guys, so check it out. I'm also involved with Blazing Trail, which is a startup focused on different applications of RFID and barcode technology. And right now, we are focusing on logistics vertical, and we have applications ready for warehouse and library management systems. And the warehouse one is being tested out and polished and finished in a small warehouse in New Delhi. Other than that, I'm involved with Ginger, which is basically an app that allows people like you and me to talk with businesses. And these guys get all sorts of random questions, like what's the price of a tea? What are the timings for happy hours? Is there any band playing today? And even to chemists and yeah. So that's what these guys are doing. So I'm going to be talking about engineering complex applications with Laravel 4. And in my opinion, well, yeah, in my opinion, fuck. In 2000, in 2013 startup world, almost any product that has to have a shot at making it is going to be complex. At least too complex for your standard MVC. And yeah, this talk is mainly going to be about my opinions and my ideas, and it's going to be all meta stuff, followed by code examples, and then some more meta stuff, then some more code examples, then it will end on a very meta note, yeah, with nature and everything coming in. Yeah, so MVC. Yeah, I started programming with PHP and jQuery, professional programming. I had experience with Java and C++ before that, but that was very minor. So yeah, I started professional programming with PHP and jQuery, and I made a lot of crap out of that. Yeah, a few websites probably are still up there that have that code in them. But very quickly I stumbled upon MVC frameworks, and I jumped from one framework to another, but I stayed in the paradigm of these frameworks. I try to use whatever these frameworks offer out of the box to tackle the projects that I was getting. And these frameworks, they worked out quite well for a few months, but as I grew and as the complexity of the projects that I needed to tackle grew, I realized that for non-trivial apps, MVC stops cutting it. And that's when I went out and searched for the next design pattern, the architectural practice, or whatever that would allow me to tackle the projects that I had in my hand that people were bringing to me, the problems that I was facing in them, in a very, in a more precise and a more artistic manner, in a more predictable manner, I guess, so that I don't screw up that much. And this is what I went through. I tried out different things in my code, and all of them had different side effects, and not so good side effects. And probably many of you would have tried one thing or the other of these in your code, and it's stuff like model should handle data, which resulted in fat controllers with every non-ORM logic, basically, going in controllers. Controller should be thin, everything went back into models, several 100-line methods, several more 100 lines, or probably 1,000-line models. Domain logic should be independent of framework, which, in my opinion, is pure bullshit. It's better to get command over the tools that you love the most, in my opinion, and to learn to really bend them to your own will. And yeah, I'm going to show some example of that also. And yeah, dependency injection in controllers, that's the thing that got rad all over when Laravel 4 came out, and I kind of don't find it Laravel-y enough. Yeah. So first example for dependency injection, not Laravel-y enough, we have, we have all this verbose setting to inject components into our controller, and then we do response colon JSON. And this is something that I found contradicting, like almost like an anti-pattern. And yeah, and here is actually the example of really bending the tools that you love the most to your own will. I've overridden the auth, the database service provider, and yeah, I have my repos. This is my repository abstraction and a few other toolkits to work with data. And Artisan Master, this is something that I'm trying out, sort of. It basically runs Artisan, allows PHP to talk to Node.js via 0MQ and run Artisan commands like that. So yeah, it's kind of like a queue service, but yeah, it's in works. The WebSocket communicator, push servers, etc. So you kind of, what I like about Laravel is that you can bend it all to suit the project that you're working on, to suit your own way of working, and that's what I like doing. That's what I'm doing over here. So yeah, after going through all of those patterns, practices, etc., and studying Laravel's code more, I right now, at this point of time as a developer, I believe that stuff that works is basically facades and service providers and dependency injection in services. You use facades to register your services with your application, and then you use facades, sorry, you use service providers to register your services with your application, then you use facades throughout your application code where you tackle your domain logic in order to, yeah, you get a very clean API and you get short, concise code which is testable and yeah, everything. And with DIN services, you get abstract service components, services as components that you can port from one project to another. And it works mainly because you have complete freedom while implementing your services. And that is kind of important. You are not forced into any pattern or anything when you are working with your services. And this is kind of what I think a Laravel controller would look like. It won't have all those constructor arguments or whatever, but it would have this repo. This is something from a package that I'm working on. It allows mockable repositories via static methods and models. So yeah, this is a post repository, find ID. Publisher is a service that publishes the post, and I take a validator out of that. If that validator fails, I return a error response. And otherwise, I publish that post, and I return this response that this post has been published. And yeah, all these things are basically, again, because of bending the response class to suit the way I want API responses to be formatted and all that stuff. So yeah, what I have, right now again, at this point of time, what I believe about architecture is that it doesn't have a finite category set. You cannot put it in separate, you cannot put architecture, something like software architecture, in a finite number of boxes, in a finite number of components. Even if you do, those components can be combined together in so many ways that really it's kind of like music, you see? Music has 7 notes, or there's some in between, I don't know. But there are countless songs, and are being made across centuries, millenniums, I don't know how much. So yeah, the goal of architecture is basically to build structures which tackle complexity by distributing it across themselves. That's kind of a level up from the patterns, because all that those patterns do is this. They distribute complexity in order to, and we are going to call this the entropy rule for the next few slides. So, path to sane and scalable architecture. Yeah, it's to always remember the entropy rule, strive for beauty and reusability. Sorry, not reusability. Strive for beauty and usability in your code. Build to an API that you would like to use. Actually, you would love to use. I think Taylor does that already. I love to use the stuff he builds. And basic stuff like take care of how information is introduced inside a scope. This is like when you're writing that's basically what dependency injection is. You take care of what arguments you are passing in an object, in a class, and that kind of results in your code being testable and separate and everything. And again, always remember the entropy rule, which is to build structures which tackle complexity by distributing it across themselves. Yep. So why do I call it the entropy rule? Because increasing the complexity that a project, that any system needs to tackle without increasing the capability of the system to tackle that complexity results in loss of information about how to handle different types of problems in the system, which I often measure by watt BFs per minute. And this loss of information about the system basically means that the entropy of the system has increased. And a simple example of this would be in a plain Laravel install, where to handle validation of different business processes. And this is something I've seen many developers struggle with in ISC channel, and I struggled with it for quite a long time. Then, yeah, I found a way around it. So yeah, architecture tackles this problem of entropy by restricting the question, how do I do X, via establishing patterns. And these questions can be anything from simple stuff like where to put models, controllers, views, how to define them, what should go in them, to where do transactions fit in, and when when a model gets created, how do you hook into that event and stuff like that. Frameworks, as you all might be able to guess by now, suppress a very large number of such questions, but they cannot, and in my opinion, should not be all-encompassing. That's because they need to cater to a wide variety of audience with very different needs. So it is your job as developers to set up proper patterns to restrict questions of a specific type from popping up more than once, and to document those patterns and to establish them as development practices in your project. What you should strive for is that once you have tackled a particular type of problem, further problems of that particular type can be solved almost mindlessly in your project. So now some code examples to put a concrete face to this meta stuff that I've said just now. Yeah, this is how I organize my applications. App has no models or controllers folder. I have a source folder inside applications where I have all these folders. This is where I put my packages that I'm developing for when I'm working in a particular project. Like if I feel like something can be an independent package in itself, it goes over here. It's kind of like a nursery of packages. And from here, it goes to a separate folder of its own and to a Git repository to package it and becomes a composer package. And yeah, I have tools, it's useless. Then services, yeah, this is where I put in business domain logic specific services. Like in that earlier example, you saw a publisher. That is something that would contain business logic. And that is the stuff that would go over here in services. Repository folder holds all my repositories. Core holds all my models on the collection classes if I need one for any model. And controllers, and commands. Basically, I think that commands and controllers are the two ways by which outsiders or users can interact with your application. This one is for CLI, and this one is for HTTP. And so I kind of treat them in a similar manner. And abstracts, yeah, I just like having a project-specific abstract class for commands, controllers, models, and repositories, which where I can add global functionality if I need to, and by just one line. And yeah, this is the structure of any component or service. Components go here, services go here. You'll just look at the stuff in this auth folder. Everything is what you would find in a simple package. Along with that, there's just a file named facade.php and a service provider. And all this stuff, these two, get registered with the Laravel application that you're working on, and application/config.php, config/app.php. And yeah, and you have these things then available in your own project. Standard responses, this is the class that I have. I have left out the implementation. It's something that, because this is the important stuff, that is something that you need in all the APIs that you're working on. And yeah, standard resource controller actions. Yeah, I don't know if you will Repo means repository. This repo means the repository of the resource that this controller is working with. I have built these tools, filterer and orderer, still under development and beta or stuff, unstable. Don't use them in your own projects. They're all on GitHub if you want to check them out. I have the link at the end of the talk. So yeah, filterer and orderer, basically for filtering and ordering. I have something called listing provider, uh, which again is mainly enabled by my repositories, which are pretty powerful. Yeah, I apply filters, apply orders. If users pagination, return a paginated response. Otherwise, a collection response. Creation, new valid. Yeah, this is how I tackle validation everywhere. Actually, this repo, if new validator is called on the repository, that kind of means that you're trying to create a new instance of the resource that you're working with, and then we go through the same process. If validator fails, we return errors, and this is how you create a model, basically, persist it. And because new persister is being called up from the repository, this stuff is going to create a model instead of updating it. Then show and update are sort of similar. The only difference is that in update, the new validator and the persister are being called up from the model, so they will deal with they would work in the context of a single model object, resource object, and would perform updation. The only reason for going through these was because they are an abstraction in my project and I use them almost everywhere, and they kind of restrict what I do in my controllers to just this. This is a sub-resource controller, and to just give you the context of what I was thinking when I wrote this, it's like there's a simple app where there are publishers, and publishers employ users, and users write posts. Those posts are then available on a public page where other users can read it, all the users actually, and then there are obviously admins. So this is the API, admin API, and that guy this is the resource post being exposed for a publisher in the admin API. And this is how I handle route bindings. Publisher to find publisher, and publisher repository find the binding variable. And yep, this is how I access a particular binding, just underscore underscore get. And I do it in the context of a controller because all my controllers kind of, my controllers are distributed across different regions of the application that, different regions that an application has. And I kind of want to control the context in which model binding is being done. And yeah, listing provider is again a repository. This again results in a repository with a scope applied on the whole query set for admin API listing and then for admin API resource. And we're going to get to repositories now. This is what they look like. For publisher, this would put a scope on the whole repository, and when you call a get or paginate or find or whatever on the repository, it would fetch that for a particular publisher. Same way for users, scope active, you just get the active stuff, and scope inactive, you just get the inactive stuff. You just query on the inactive stuff. And this is how they can be used, and I love this. So post extends the abstract model. This is how the repository factory kind of hooks into everything via this method. And when I do this, this gets called, and I get a new post repository, which we saw earlier. And I can just make new repositories by applying these scopes, like active user posts repo, scope active, scope inactive, active user posts for publisher. So that would give me active posts for a particular user under a particular publisher. And yeah, just normal user posts for a publisher. I don't need to apply the active scope over there. And all the repositories, in the end, finally offer these few methods that you can work with. Get, first, paginate, find, yeah. So I plan to make these implementation independent because all the implementation actually goes in the closures. So the repositories themselves can be independent of the database type, whether it's a MySQL database or a NoSQL, or you're fetching the data from some API or something. And yeah, this is how it works. So, but still it's unstable, beta. Don't try it in your own projects unless you want to build it. with me or on your own. So yeah, like I said, that you do service dependency injection in services, and that's the worst dependency injection I've ever done. So you have config identity store. That's an auth package that I made that because I didn't like any of the authentication packages out there, which allow me to deal with simple username password authentication, and along with that, OAuth authentication, while giving me an API key back that I can use for mobile devices and etc. etc. So that not having that resulted in this. HTTP client for interacting with OAuth services, session store, identity store, or something else. But basically, this is how a service is made using dependency injection. And it is facilitated by service providers. Well, that's that class getting instantiated in a service provider. And that's a facade over this whole service. So in, yeah, in the end, I kind of use it like this. Auth set user repository, route filter, auth check request, response unauthorized, admin, auth scope, get user, user is admin. Instead of auth user, I do auth scope, get user, and response forbidden. Publisher, employee, that's a filter, like, the part of the read API that is only accessible to the employees of a particular publisher. That over there, I kind of need something like auth colon publisher, the same way you have auth colon user in Laravel. And I do that via this set publisher, connected employee profile, publisher. I think it's clear till now? Yeah, okay. Yeah. So I hope you guys were able to see that I kind of build a lot of abstractions over which I implement my domain logic. That again fits in with the whole idea of actually getting to know your tools, trying to find out how they tackle the problems that they are tackling, and then trying to tackle the problems that you face in your own projects in the same manner. And once you build the proper set of abstractions, you can reduce your domain logic to just set of human readable instructions or configurations that really just allow you to piece different things together and do whatever you want to do. And yeah, I already talked about abstractions. But I had to move to this slide earlier. So purpose of abstractions is basically to reduce the complexity that code written over them tackles, and to bring it closer to configuration or human readable instructions in terms of the amount of logic it contains. However, abstraction is kind of a double-edged sword. I have suffered a lot at the hands of premature abstraction. I kind of did that in order to save myself some time. Like there are certain business rules which kind of look similar, and I would abstract them into something. But that kind of comes to bite you back very soon. So I have kind of developed some heuristics of sorts about abstractions that allow me to judge or decide about, how an abstraction should be made or if it should be made or not. So yeah, abstractions should seldom deal with business, the project domain logic, and that's the ideal case, that they don't deal with it at all. They just kind of fit into your project. And they should still facilitate writing project domain logic in a concise and yet expressive manner. These are kind of opposite points, but the best abstractions that I've made, like the repositories that I showed you, I find them to be the best things that I've made till now. The best abstractions kind of satisfy both of these points very well. And I think that's my standard for judging any abstract component or toolkit that I make now. Yeah, this is again, they should meld into the underlying framework and enhance its capabilities and bend it to better suit the domain of the project. It's kind of like the same thing that Taylor did with Swift Mailer. He made a good Laravel-like API over it. Whenever you're making abstractions and working with, say, you prefer Laravel, so make abstractions that kind of work the way that it does, that Laravel does. Because that kind of maintains a uniformity throughout the code, less impedance mismatch, less context switching when working through a project. If you don't like the way Laravel works, kind of don't use it. And yeah, just go with something else that suits you more. And yeah, this is very important. A clear separation should be maintained between the code for framework enhancing abstractions, domain specific abstractions, and domain logic. especially the domain logic should be kept separately. This I know is important because I kind of got a remark from one of the developers who came to work on a project that I was involved in, and it was like this: he liked the fact that I didn't invent anything new, and I stuck to old and proven practices. But in fact, I had made a lot of stuff that went in that project, like uploading stuff directly to S3, resizing images into 5 different sizes, and then running it via the uploader configuration-based authentication, a configuration-based admin panel of sorts. Yeah, but all that was invisible to him. It was documented locally, and so when he had to work on a feature, on implementing a feature, he just needed to look at the area of the code that he was working in and see how things are being done over there, and look at the tools that were there at his disposal, and then just piece them together to build something that satisfies what he was trying to build. So yeah, now that's all about abstractions. Now we're getting domain logic. 5 is a random number of sorts, mainly, but it's better to divide business processes into parts, into different parts, and these different parts are basically authentications, permissions, etc., which are handled usually in filters. Well, setting up contextual data, like I was setting the publisher in the scope of the authentication in a filter. When the API when the context in which the user was performing the action needed it, that is again handled in filters. Validating the process, that's validators, I'll get to them in a while. Doing the processors, these are usually just model methods in my projects. And triggering side effects like mails, queues, logs, etc., events and event handlers after filters, and they can be anywhere really. Each of these parts deal with the complexity of their responsibility and offer a pretty looking API. And this thing is enabled by the extended framework over which you are writing your domain logic. So, and controllers, and also the commands, basically, are the things that allow users to interact with your system. All they should do is basically identify the context in which the user is taking his action and bring different pieces of your business logic together according to what the user is trying to do. And if your pieces deal with the complexity of their responsibility and offer pretty looking API, they kind of gel in very well together. That again goes back to the second point somewhere in my path to sane and scalable architecture, where I emphasized on beauty of code and the pretty looking API that you would like to use. That kind of results in components that can be put together very well. So yeah. And the closest pattern that I know to all closest definition of a pattern or whatever, that I know that comes close to whatever I have said till now, is data, context, and integration. I don't like that name because it's also logic that is being put in together according to the context. So, example, yeah. This is a controller action. Again, now we are in a publisher API. We are just looking at post controller, and this would be publish method for a post. We are getting the ID. We're getting like this because of some other. Yeah, well, I can show it to you if you want to know, but not right now. So, yeah, this is how I implement business processes. Posts, new publishing validator. Instead of just a new validator, I can just name it the way I want. If validation fails, I don't do anything. I just send an error response. Otherwise, I publish the post and give an action response back. And the after filter, basically, artisan master, that's like queue push. Just think of it as queue push, that you're pushing the notifications to all the users that need to be notified when a post gets published. And this only happens when the response status code is 200. If it's not equal to 200, or you can just manipulate that. After filter, just logging stuff, request and response via queues. This is what a validator looks like for me. Validator is one of my favorite components of Laravel. It's evaluated lazily, and each validator object can have extensions added to it. that can have logic of their own via closures. And so valid publishing user, this rule can mean something else in the in some other method of some other model. But right now, but in the model post under the method new publishing validator, it just looks for valid publishing user that does this, can this user publish this post? And that rule is added to the validator object that I have over here via this closure. And then all of this is returned. And if you just stick to using facades and service providers and services and work with all that in your application layer, all of this stuff remains unit testable. And yeah, that's it about domain logic and abstractions. Here are some pretty great reads on architecture. Design patterns aren't. That's an ancient presentation that I found somewhere, probably on Jeff Atwood's blog, I think, yeah. And then there's Peter Lindbergh's blog. I don't know who Peter Lindbergh is, really. But these articles and the stuff from July 2002, it's really awesome, especially the things on the irrational software. Then there is stuff by Nicolas Zakas, scalable JavaScript applications, scalable JavaScript application architecture. It has very portable concepts. Then there was something by Kirk, sorry, an alternative app workflow in Laravel 4. He kind of talks about building applications out of composer packages instead of just, the way I did, by distributing things into different folders. And that kind of is cool because you can like have your model layer separated out altogether and define the dependencies of that layer in itself. The API layer can be separate. All different front ends can be different things altogether. And yeah, now this is a talk that Machuga pointed me to, but it's nowhere to be found now. Sandy Metz, Less, The Path to Better Design. But it was awesome. It was kind of a life-changing talk of sorts. And huh? It's still up? The link to, yeah, the link you gave was dead. Is dead now. Yeah. Okay. So Laravel source code, in my opinion, is actually a pretty great read on architecture and how to build complex applications, how to build pieces that you can put in together very well. And then there is a pattern language, a book by Christopher Alexander. And this sentence is the only thing that I've read about it. And I want to read this book, and I'll do it whenever I get the time. It is the book that kind of inspired the Gang of Four to write design patterns, whatever design patterns they wrote. And yeah, this line, this statement, this question, how can you distribute responsibility for design through all levels of a large hierarchy while still maintaining consistency and harmony of overall design? It's kind of a motivating factor, or guiding light of sorts for me when I'm making things that I need to put together and distribute complexity and whatever. So yeah, that's it in the end. And I would like to end it with this statement that when building things, try to emulate nature. Just think of the way nature works at times. Each cell in your body is a very complex thing in itself. And all that complexity inside such a small space, and somehow it is built in such a way that it can interact with other cells and form organs. It can form this brain, this heart, that continue to work for around 80, 90 years, or I don't know. Yeah, your heart kind of beats regularly, every second, every hour, every day, and it still works. And then we humans, all these organs form us. They form an individual, a human. And humans then come together to form societies, to form corporations, to form companies, organize conferences. We again build things. It's kind of like that statement, tackling the complexity of your responsibility while providing a pretty looking API. So try to practice that in your own code. I try to do that, and I would advise you the same. In the end, that's it. And that's the link to my repost GitHub repository where you can find my repositories and stuff. So yeah. Thank you. Yeah, man. Yeah, you're getting the mic.
Hello.
Cool. So first, Ripper Talk, that was awesome. Good insight into how you like to do things, and it's always good to see how everybody else does it, and kind of revalidates how you do your own thing. So thank you for that.
Okay.
Second thing is, in a nutshell, everybody has their own sort of way of planning abstractions. Okay, so for me, what I tend to do is it's the only time I ever get a pen out, but I get a pen and paper and I draw up what I want.
Yeah.
I know Taylor. I can't remember where I think he said it to me. Well, I don't know. He gets out and when he makes an API for something, he writes up the API, puts no logic in there, and like gets his methods all pretty,
Okay.
gets those comments indented in the right direction, and all that stuff, and then builds in the logic.
Yeah.
How do you go about? Because planning abstractions is something that takes a long time, and it's hard to perfect. And what's your if you want to get into it?
Yeah, I kind of write down a narrative on a pen and paper, like a story of what's going to happen. Yeah, and how things should happen.
Yeah,
like that.
Yeah, awesome, cool, thank you.
Anyone? Okay.
Again, thank you. Also, it was really cool to see an alternative approach as well, and thanks again for referencing me as well. One thing I'm kind of curious of, I've been developing now for about 12, 15 years, and it's taken me about that long to finally get to a point where I'm comfortable with, the way I go about things. How many kind of, I guess, revisions or reiterations of application structure do you think you went through before you kind of start settling on a point, like, okay, this is, kind of heading in the right direction?
A lot, man. Yeah, a lot. I don't keep count.
Yeah, probably I failed to notice it, but I didn't notice on your file structure being an enterprise app. I didn't notice splitting down the different maybe modules by packages and using, for instance, since we are diving into Laravel. Using the workbench and how you synchronize one package to one different Git repo, and then how you put it all together in the end to to install the big main app. Any advices on that, or on how that should be done?
Right. That's something that I asked in Jordy's talk also. That how do is there some way to point composer dependencies to file system directories? But he said he kind of does stuff in Vendor, but this is the thing that I'm doing right now that works for me, that I have my own namespace, K, and inside that I have all the abstract or the components that I'm making, and as they get mature enough to become their own independent packages, I take them out into a different folder. They become composer packages, go up on GitHub, and they are added to the dependency on composer.json. And yeah, it kind of works. I just tried it out that my composer vendor namespace is also K, so I kind of can use them like just like that. So all of them are loaded under the same namespace of sorts.
Any practical difference between doing this and and putting them directly on Workbench?
On Workbench, Workbench I kind of found tedious to use. Yeah. So that's the thing.
I think the main difference is that with Workbench, when you're using Artisan to kind of manage it, it manages a lot of kernel dependencies and parts for you. You just kind of need to kind of add it to your main composer, and that's pretty much it. Whereas I assume you've got a little bit more manual work to set up.
Yeah. But yeah, I like it. This one works, man. This really works. Yeah. So anyone else?
Okay.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
How was it?